how do we process a heritage breed, or you can go breed by breed, differently than a standard commercial leaner pig?
Yeah, that's still up in the air. That's a tricky one. As far as processing lard pigs, bacon pigs, and lean pigs, the tricky thing is, and this is totally understandable, all of the processors in this country are set up through the organization of their shops and the training of their personnel to harvest lean pigs. And that is because that's the only kind of pork that anybody wants. And so that's what they're set up to produce. They are not set up to do a holistic harvest of a lard pig. If you take them a lard pig or even a bacon pig, like a Gloucester Old Spot, they will remove all of the fat so that it looks like a lean pork yield. And with some lard pigs, that means that you will be charged for the processing of the hot weight of the hanging weight of the pig, but you will only be able to sell about 40 to 50% of that, because the 60 to 50% of the fat that they trim will be trimmed, which means thrown away, or it'll be put in a paper bag in their walk-in to be sold to the rendering plant or picked up by the rendering plant, where they turn it into cosmetics and stuff. Or I don't know what they turn it into, stuff that's not going to your customers. So that's the challenge that lard pigs face, that any pig that is even just a little bit fat will face. And it's not because they're bad butchers. It's because the consumer will regard themselves as being ripped off if there's a lot of fat in their pork.
Yeah. If they see it, they don't look at it like, oh, I get to have this fat, they've given me everything. It's, why is there so much fat?
Yeah.
Where's all the lean?
And that's understandable too on the consumer end. If the fat is not usable, if it's just 4 inches of fat on a pork chop, that is ridiculous. I mean, that is, I could figure it out, but that's because I have been a butcher for almost a decade and I am a fat fanatic. Like, that is, I have a pathology, obsessive pathology with fat. And and I actually relish the challenge of using it in the kitchen. That is not common, understandably. And I think the thing that if we're going to make the pork sellable, convenience is like a very profane term to use for it, because it's tainted by our culture's strange enthronement of consumer people as humans being only consumers. But I would say like utility or usability, or the domestic kitchen is this kind of sacred space where if you can make something useful in that space, people will desire it, and it actually enhances their lives. And so the challenge goes so much further than just not trimming all the fat, on a lard pig. It has to be turning it into something that's not just useful, but that suggests its own use to the home kitchen and the benefit that will bring to the domestic economy. And the flavor of every meal. And that is just a huge burden. And all of that whole challenge begins with the processor.
Yeah. They're like in that hub. I mean, you described this actually in your last harvest journal that you wrote for our membership. And you described this like vicious cycle almost of, the farmer wants to raise heritage breeds because that's the thing to do. And then they sell it to a consumer, but it has to go through a processor. And so the farmer wants to get the greatest yield. So they tell the butcher, don't trim.
Don't trim the fat.
Right.
I want 100% hanging weight, because crazy people like me put the notion out there that you can get 100% hanging weight.
Yeah, exactly.
And I'm sure I have elicited a lot of hate from processors. And I'm sorry. I understand.
Yeah.
I really don't blame the processor.
Yeah. No, we're actually good friends with a lot of the local processors in the state. But okay, so the farmer tells the butcher, don't trim.
Yeah.
The butcher then has 2 options, and they take both options. They're not afraid of satisfying the farmer, but some of them have done it so much that they know the end result, which is, okay, I'm going to follow the farmer's desire, and I'm not going to trim. Then they have a consumer that's mad at them because they got all the fat and they don't know what to do with it. And so then either the butcher or the farmer gets mad at.
Right.
They get yelled at. And yeah. Okay. So then, or the butcher can say, no, farmer, you don't know what you want. You don't want me to hang on to this meat. I'm going to trim it. Just trust me on this.
Yeah.
Like, I'm doing it for your benefit.
Yeah.
So they do trim it. The consumer gets the meat. They're happy with it, although they're like, this is it. Like, that's not, like, where's all the volume, right?
Yeah.
Because, but then the farmer ends up going, okay, well, that's great. I'm glad the consumer's happy, but I didn't get paid for all of the weight that I put into this animal. And so at any stage of that cycle, someone ends up, not to mention the pig itself,
exactly,
they're not getting the full benefit of all the work that went into that pig raising.
Right.
And there's cuts.
So with the sheets of fat that the butcher is peeling off of that carcass, understandably, he's peeling off dollar bills that the farmer put into the pig.
Right.
And that narrative you just described, that is the greatest threat to lard pigs, to heritage breeds. Yeah. That is why it makes no sense to raise them.
That's why,
for money.
Exactly. And because we're such fans of lard pigs, for the sustainability of the breeds and advancing this desire to eat well of the lard pig in your own home, we need to actually retrain our minds and think better about the whole system rather than just like, here's free livestock, here's free genetics. Like, hang on, no, because that's actually going to make people more...
Right. It's going to put more monkey wrenches in the system.
Exactly.
It's not solving the problem. It's addressing
So that's why we bring it up.
Symptom. Yeah.
Is because we want to see the success of these heritage breeds.
Yeah.
But it's not just getting more heritage breeds animals out there in the universe. It's like, no, we have to actually fix the whole system. And that sounds really draconian and impossible. But it's let's also talk about the processing itself. That's why we do what we do, is trying to create, and we have actually helped dozens of, maybe more than that, farmers, equipped them to raise the kind of animal that they want and then process the animal properly according to its physiological needs.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah, because what happens in that whole narrative is that the heritage pig gets blamed. Yeah. And part of that is because you're trying to shove a square peg through a round hole. And the metrics for judging the quality of heritage pork, or of pork in general, are only, they only give A+ to lean pigs. Like, I don't know how else to say it, but there's lots of carcass evaluation things that universities put out there, Iowa State University, and they're not good for heritage pigs. And for some reason, breed associations want to get their breed on those standards so that they can get a score. The score is always going to be fail, always, because they only pass lean, fast-growing, meat-producing machines. Understandable, because that's what the consumer wants. So that is the greatest challenge facing heritage pigs, but more specifically, lard pigs. And that's why I think it is, for me, it's so much of it comes down to price, Yeah. And if you are going as a farmer to sell a pig on the hoof, half a lard pig, to somebody, you need to get paid for all of the hanging weight. And if the processor, by necessity, by his 10 years of experience, he knows that this is what needs to happen, he decides to trim 60% of hanging weight, you need to charge twice as much for your pork, for half the amount, right, that the customer is actually getting. And so much of that comes back to the butcher, the processor. He's the only one that really knows exactly how much fat's on there. The farmer has a very vague notion that fat is good and wonderful. Usually it's quite vague. But the butcher is looking at the carcass and you don't understand. 70% of this animal is fat.
Well, and the butcher's the one that usually ends up seeing the customer anyway when they pick up.
Pick up, yeah.
And so if there's any like cross eyes or like, what's in this box? This isn't. The butcher's going, look, buddy, I just obeyed orders. You know, like he told me not to trim, and so the butcher's in that facilitator, that position.
And it's, the slaughterhouses, USDA or custom mobile units, they are operating at max capacity in this country. There are not enough of them. And there's almost no exception to that. And so these little tiny shops, they are flying. They are operating at such a high degree of efficiency. They have to even stay in business, because the expectation for the price of processing is abysmally low, way below a living wage for a family to work at one of these things. Unless you diversify and you just work all the time, which a lot of these guys do. And so there's not the space in the slaughterhouse assembly line, and I don't use that in a negative sense, to accommodate a pig that looks radically different than all of the others, because they have to mechanize a lot of what they do with bandsaws and jet netting and mechanical slicing and all of that stuff.
It really is like fitting a round peg through a square hole.
Yes, in so many ways that they just can't slow everything down and take off one side from the rail and say or one whole pig or 2 out of 50 that day, which is still small scale.
Yeah.
Or out of 20 that day, which is still small scale. To pull 2 pigs off and say, okay, we're going to treat these like they're a different species.
Yeah.
It's not going to happen. Understandably,
as an owner of a business,
maybe that can, but they're going to have to charge way more for it, and the farmer's going to have to be okay with that. And then where the rubber really meets the road is the buyer is going to have to understand that greater value. And I cannot tell you, it boils my blood, how many times people tout the consumers, and this goes for chefs, and consumers tout the superiority or their desire, especially restaurants. I guess they're mostly guilty for this in my mind, for heritage breed pork, but they're unwilling to pay for it. And that's
where ultimately,
that's the problem.
Yeah.
I think.
Yeah.